Islands are places on Earth where life can truly experiment, and animals that were once small can become large, and large animals can become significantly smaller. Islands are also a place where whole new genera can come to be, notable examples including the islands of New Zealand and Mauritius, where entirely new organisms had a chance to evolve and to diversify, leading to islands being hotspots in terms of biodiversity. This is no different throughout distant time, and in the Mesozoic, there have also been cases of dinosaurs and other organisms responding to the changes in habitat and lack of large competition. Nowhere else is this more apparent with Hateg Island in what is now Romania, where some truly fascinating animals roamed. As well as the unique fauna of the island's geologic history and discovery is just as important as these factors, which all come together to make a very interesting landmass. During much of the Mesozoic, Europe was largely made up of a series of islands, which Hateg was one of many, and has been estimated to have been around 80,000 square kilometres, around the same size as the modern island of Hispaniola. The island existed from the Cenomanian to the Maastrichtian ages, and was formed mainly through tectonic upheaval during the early Alpine orogeny, which itself was caused by the collision of the African and Eurasian plates. The climate of Hateg Island from the end of the Cretaceous was subtropical, with an average temperature of 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, experiencing marked rainy and dry seasons, although the plant life remained tropical in nature. Carbon isotopes indicate dry woodland conditions, which does seem contradictory between the seasonally dry climate and tropical plant species, although this can be explained by the fact that tropical plants can thrive in a seasonally monsoonal environment, as long as they have access to sufficient amounts of water year-round, and the Hateg environment was dominated by braided rivers and lakes. The island was likely located 200 kilometers from the nearest landmass, and was surrounded primarily by a deep marine basin, unlike much of the surrounding islands and landmasses, which were instead surrounded by shallow seas. Franz Nopcsa, a man who himself had a remarkable history too large to be covered in this video, was the first to discover the remarkable fauna of the island, and described 10 vertebrate taxa from the region, including dinosaurs, crocodiles and turtles, of which 6 are still currently recognised as valid. Between 1897 and 1929, he made a series of notes and papers on the fauna, and noted that many of the dinosaurs he had found were more primitive and smaller than what was found in neighbouring regions. Recognising this, he attributed these animals to have belonged to an isolated island landmass, where separated from the more competitive mainland and with limited resources, animals gradually became smaller and smaller over subsequent generations. Nopcsa called his theory the Insular theory, more commonly known as the island rule, where, as mentioned, animals can become smaller over time to adapt to the lessening of resources. This had already been noted in the many species of proboscideans which had ended up on small islands across the world, cut off from their relatives as sea levels rose, or swimming from the mainland to the islands, although this was the first known case in dinosaurs. Despite this though, for years, many experts doubted his claims, suggesting instead that many of his findings were merely that of juvenile animals, and the study of supposedly dwarfed Hateg Island dinosaurs was interrupted for many decades, until being resumed in 1977, where gradually more and more people began to explore the formations. Since then, fieldwork has revealed a great array of extinct animals, currently including 56 taxa from all vertebrate classes. Since the days of Nopcsa up until today, many discoveries have revealed that Hateg was filled by many animals found nowhere else in the world, and the diversity of these animals is surely the selling point of the formation. One of these animals was the small sauropod known as Mesozoic, a sauropod belonging to the clade Titanosauria that at around 6 meters long and around a ton in weight for the largest of specimens, was among one of the smallest of its group. Mesozoic continues to require more refined anatomical revision, but it has been supported as being closest to the controversial Repetosaurus clade, which includes the basal Repetosaurus, Nemegtosaurus, and Trigonosaurus, which contains a mix of early and late Cretaceous taxa, and as apparent from surviving up until the KPG boundary, outlasted many of its older relatives. Numerous explanations as to why this is have been brought up over the years, whether animals became stranded on the island after sea levels rose, swam to the island from a nearby region, or were episodically connected by land bridges with the rest of the European landmasses is still ongoing, although it is evident that there must have been some communication with the mainland earlier in the Cretaceous, and once on the island continued to survive while many of their relatives declined or became extinct. The remains of at least 10 individuals have been recovered, with the holotype consisting of a set of vertebrae and caudal vertebrae, as well as dorsal elements of the skeleton have been found, although a skull is not yet known due to preservation bias. Fossil eggs from the region have also been attributed to this genus, and remarkably, some of them have preserved embryos inside the eggs, with one showing evidence of dermal armouring, which are known as osteoderms, which indicates that dermal armour had a wide distribution across these late Cretaceous sauropods. As mentioned earlier, the small size of these animals and the assumption that they were fully grown was debated upon, and many disagreed. However, the debate was finally put to rest when a detailed study of bone growth patterns through histology published in 2010 supported Nopska's original hypothesis that Magirrhosaurus and similar animals were indeed small even when fully grown. The histology also revealed that Magirrhosaurus had a reduced growth rate, likely down to a lack of predation, and this means that they may have been able to live longer than their mainland relatives, although they did have a high metabolic rate. Another organism that shows evidence of insular dwarfism is a basal hadrosaurid known as Telmatosaurus, an animal of around 5 meters in length and around half a ton in weight. Like Magirrhosaurus, an examination of the microstructure of the bones revealed that the biggest specimens were indeed adults, even though they were much smaller compared to their mainland relatives. Like Magirrhosaurus again, Telmatosaurus occupies a basal position in cladograms and is in fact the most basal hadrosaur, being a sister taxon to Euhadrosauria. This position so low in the phylogeny of the group is unexpected for a Maastrichtian hadrosaur, and places Telmatosaurus phylogenetically below hadrosaurids from the Santonian and Campanian of North America and Asia, therefore introducing a minimum ghost lineage of some 15 million years or more. The teeth of Telmatosaurus are also unique compared to its relatives, as its teeth retain features found in juvenile animals. The maxillary teeth of Telmatosaurus are narrow, diamond-shaped, and equipped with a single centrally placed ridge, most like the juvenile condition seen in non-hadrosaurid iguanodontians, but also similar to the typical maxillary teeth of more derived hadrosaurids. The most fascinating discovery attributed to these animals is a remarkable case of paleopathology in a juvenile animal, which bears a non-cancerous tumour called an amyloblastoma on its lower jaw. The reason for its significance is that before this discovery, amyloblastomas were only known from modern mammals, including humans and some reptiles. The discovery in an amyloblastoma in a dinosaur gives evidence that the development of benign tumours is a basal characteristic, and not just a relatively modern condition. It is unlikely that the tumour caused the animal any serious pain during the early stages of development, as like in humans, the animal was quite young when it died. As like in humans, the tumour doesn't begin to negatively affect the organism until later life, and the animal was quite young when it died based off of its size, meaning the tumour didn't have enough time to contribute to the organism's death, although it could have affected its overall feeding. A dinosaur that was likely a dwarf as well was the unique Salmoxas, a genus of raptodontid ornithopod that contains 2 species, being the smaller Robustus and Schickiperorum. Initially classified as the species Moclodon robustum in 1899 by Franz Nopska, before being reclassified by him in 1915 as Raptodon robustum. This name was then corrected to Raptodon robustus by George Olszewski, and in 2003 the species was once more reclassified, this time under the type species Salmoxas robustus. Salmoxas robustus, found on Hateg Island, was around 2.5 meters in length, and an as of yet unnamed species could reach lengths of 2.9 meters. Salmoxas is a comparatively more robust animal than its precursors and more derived relatives, and even among the already unique Hateg Island animals, Salmoxas is even more of a basal taxon when compared to other related fauna. In a cladistic analysis conducted in 2003, it was found that the two species of Salmoxas were closest to Rhabdodon, and comprised the family Rhabdodontidae, a sister clade of Iguanodontia, confirming a long-held assumption that Iguanodontians were primarily from the early Cretaceous, and this implies a ghost lineage of around 73 million years, connecting the late Cretaceous Rhabdodontids with their closest early Cretaceous relatives. This indicates that in this case, Salmoxas is not uniquely primitive to Hateg Island, but the whole ornithopod fauna in late Cretaceous Europe appears to be relictual, whereas throughout the rest of the world, hadrosaurs dominated the rest of the northern hemisphere, likely due to Europe being largely separated from much of the surrounding landmasses. Another notable ornithischian discovered around the region was the small nudosaurid Strethosaurus. One of the smallest of its group known, Strethosaurus has been estimated at around 2.2 meters long, and like so many of its contemporaries, was also quite basal. The basal position based on its anatomy and other characteristics results in a similarly long ghost lineage, around 55 million years, or possibly an extended one, as its sister taxa are late Jurassic or possibly Middle Jurassic in age. The generic name of Strethosaurus is derived from the New Latin strethio, which means of the ostrich, which was given based on the bird-like morphology of the animal's brain case. The back of the head didn't appear very reptilian to initial describers, as it was low, compact, fused, and convex in a curve towards the skull roof, and quite unlike a more typical reptilian skull. As time went on, it was found that many dinosaurs shared this feature, and in nudosaurids like Strethosaurus, it was a convergently evolved trait. From preserved osteoderms, it is evident that Strethosaurus still had an evolutionary function for its dermal armour, that being for defending against predation, which as we'll see later, would have been very useful against a known top predator of the island. Dinosaurs are of course not the only fauna to have developed in a unique way on Hateg, as their relatives, pterosaurs and crocodilomorphs, also went through their own unique development. One of these animals was Allodapasuchus precedens, a species of the genus which showcases the once extraordinary diversity of crocodilomorphs. Allodapasuchus, like many late Cretaceous crocodilomorphs, had a relatively small body size compared to living crocodilians, with the largest specimen being around 3 meters in length. Fossils from the 4 species of the genus have been found across Europe, including Spain, Romania and France, with the type species Allodapasuchus precedens being the species found on Hateg, and being quite the interesting animal. Although the shape varies between species, Allodapasuchus had a short, flattened and rounded skull, being the most apparent in precedens, although other species also possessed a more typical middle-snouted skull. This shortened skull implies that these animals would have been able to tackle larger prey than animals with longer, more fragile skulls, being able to better hold down struggling prey with their more compact and powerfully built muscles, indicating that they could have preyed on juvenile dinosaurs and other animals in the region. And given that many of the dinosaurs on the island were dwarves, meant that Allodapasuchus would have been a formidable predator. Pterosaurs were also a notable part of the island's ecosystem, and being able to fly, could effectively travel throughout the European archipelago, and on Hateg they were especially defining. This is no more apparent with the ever-imposing Hatzegopteryx, the largest known predator to have lived on the island. This pterosaur was a member of Asdarchidae, a remarkable family of pterosaurs that, with their long legs and enormous necks and heads, were most comparable to modern-day storks, feeding on a wide variety of animals and their carcasses, whether they be small reptiles, birds, or even dinosaurs. Unfortunately, Hatzegopteryx, like many other pterosaurs, are known from little when it comes to remains, although what we do have can still tell us a lot about these animals and their anatomy and behaviour. The holotype consists of 2 fragments from the back of the skull, as well as the damaged proximal part of a left humerus. Additional remains that have been attributed to the genus over the years includes part of a mandible, scapulocoracoid and femur, which while little, still gives a glimpse into this remarkable pterosaur. The bones attributed to the pterosaur were once considered so massive that they were initially thought to belong to a theropod dinosaur, but it was only through closer examination that their true identity could be fully revealed. From comparisons with other Asdarchids, Hatzegopteryx was found to have been a truly massive animal, likely having a wingspan of around 10 to 12 meters, making it one of the largest animals to have ever flown. On occasion, arguments have been made to suggest that Hatzegopteryx and other related giant asdarchids that at the size of a giraffe would have been incapable of flight, and that they would have been flightless. This, however, has never been much of a controversy to pterosaur researchers, as although these animals would have spent a great deal of time on the ground, as we'll get into, it doesn't mean that they weren't capable of flight. The anatomy of pterosaurs, in a particular asdarchids, is extraordinarily adapted for flight, with their tiny torsos, hollow bones and interior air sacs, meaning that they weighed very little, and their skulls, while indeed massive and as big or bigger than a person, was also incredibly light, and their antorbital opening and nasal opening was merged into a single large opening called the naso-antorbital fenestra, meaning that their seemingly top-heavy heads weren't so heavy after all. This meant that even Hatzegopteryx would have weighed just 200 to 250 kilograms, despite being the height of a giraffe. To get themselves into the air was also a remarkable feat, in that using their powerful forelimbs, they would have been able to launch themselves from a standing position and into a flighted one through a quad launch. This is similar to bats, which also being quadrupedal employ the same strategy, a modern analogue which is a key example of how even the largest pterosaurs would have taken to the air. The avian skeleton has two large girdles for limb muscles, an enlarged shoulder and chest region for flight muscles, as well as an enhanced pelvic region to anchor powerful hind limb launch muscles. In contrast, pterosaurs have only one large limb girdle, being their shoulders, which in Hatzegopteryx would have had space for 50 kilograms in their pectoral region, a value appropriate for initiating flight in the animals. This form of locomotion is a far more economic use of muscle mass, as the same muscles that power flight can also initiate launch, whereas in birds they have to allocate muscles into both their legs and wings, the former of which become useless when in flight. The quad launch allows for pterosaurs to have smaller torsos and lighter legs, enabling pterosaurs to reach such unprecedented sizes, whereas birds max out at wingspans of 5 to 6 meters, and masses of 22 to 40 kilograms, in the case of pelagornithids. Back to Hatzegopteryx, being an asdarchid was already quite unique, but differences in its skull and neck length compared to other asdarchids meant that this pterosaur was really something special. The skull of Hatzegopteryx was interestingly shorter and more robust than other asdarchids, with large ridges indicating strong muscular attachments, and has been estimated to have been around 1.6 meters in length. By comparing the dimensions to other giant asdarchid cervical remains, and to the more completely known necks of smaller taxa, it was found that the neck of Hatzegopteryx would have been around 1.5 meters, which sounds impressive until you realise that the much smaller 4.6 meter wingspan of the asdarchid Quetzalcoatlus spur has a neck of equal size. While on the contrary, the holotype cervical of Aramborgiania, which would have had a comparable wingspan, was estimated to have a neck length of 2.65 meters. This would have meant that Hatzegopteryx would have been shorter than these other giant pterosaurs, although with its more compact and powerfully built neck would have been 10 times stronger than Aramborgiania when compared through a series of strength assessments. This implies a vastly different neck function than compared to other pterosaurs, and because of this made Hatzegopteryx an absolutely formidable predator. From all of this, it is apparent that Hatzegopteryx was built more to withstand higher stresses around its neck and head, and this suggests that according to pterosaur expert Mark Whitten, Hatzegopteryx could be imagined as an imposing mix of a shoebill stork, a ground hornbill, and the Terminator. Through this, Hatzegopteryx has been interpreted as being able to bring down far larger prey items than what their relatives could, being able to violently forage for food, with quick and remarkably powerful strikes being able to bludgeon even some of the larger animals of Hatzeg, such as Salmoxas, Talmatosaurus, and even juvenile Magirrhosaurus, and being able to swallow anything human-sized or smaller. It is also known that asdarchids were more than suited for terrestrial locomotion, with data from asdarchid posture, limb proportions, and trackways, indicating that Asdarchids would have been competent walkers, and would have been able to walk and even trot and run whilst their wings were folded up. This has led to the suspicion that as no large theropod fossils have turned up in the same sediments after being sampled for centuries, it seems that Hatzegopteryx may have been the apex predator of the island, and was almost certainly robust enough to tackle good-sized prey. It seems that the overall robustness of the animal was an adaptation to better able tackle larger prey, in the complete absence of large theropod competition, and because of this, over time, more bulky animals were favoured through natural selection. And because they could get better access to larger food sources, they were the ones that were more likely to pass on their genes to future generations, eventually leading to the magnificent Hatzegopteryx. As well as being a terrestrial terror, Hatzegopteryx was of course not restricted to Hateg Island, and would have been able to fly at speeds of around 90 km/h once airborne, and once in an area of uplift such as in deflected winds or thermals, could adopt energy-saving soaring and gliding with occasional wing beats to travel the globe, with their speed and flight range being able to bypass most geographical barriers, so a vagrant Hatzegopteryx in say Hell Creek would not be entirely impossible. All in all, Hateg Island was a fascinating insight into the fauna of islands back in the Cretaceous, showing that even back then, islands were just the places of experimentation and diversity that they are today, and shows that many animals went through extraordinary diversification when isolated from their close relatives. There are of course other peculiar animals that inhabited the island, from small mammals, amphibians, lizards, the aforementioned turtles and birds, as well as an unusual animal so fascinating and unique that itself deserves its own video. And in the future, more may still have yet to be found. Many of the Hateg Island fauna are incomplete, and it is exciting to think of all the mysteries that await in the rocks of what was once Hateg Island. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time, whenever that may be.